Hello and welcome. My name is Ann Lundquist and I'm the Associate Director for the North Central Comprehensive Center. Joining me here today is my colleague Carol Massanari. Carol is the Director for the Mountain Plains Regional Resource Center. The purpose of this electronic tool is to provide viewers with guidance and information on the processes and skills that are necessary to develop a standards-based IEP. The project is a result of a collaborative effort between the North Central Comprehensive Center and the Mountain Plains Regional Resource Center. This professional development is designed into 3 modules. They include short videos, voice over PowerPoints, and numerous electronic resources and documents as well. Now you may choose to view all 3 modules in one setting, or if you like, pause and revisit the modules as you like over a period of time. If you've not taken the opportunity to download the presentation outline that you'll find in the resources section of our website, you'll want to do that now. It will provide a valuable guide for you as you walk through this information with Carol and I. Finally, it's important to note that since this electronic tool does not support an interactive communication platform of any kind, and because likely your states will have specific guidance and requirements for the development of standards-based IEPs, you'll want to direct all of your questions to either your district or your state level special education administrator or contact person. With that, please join me in welcoming Carol Massanari.
Thanks, Ann. As Ann mentioned, there will be 3 modules, and this is Module 1. This module is really to give an overview of the whole idea of IEP development and what it means to have standards-based IEPs. Aristotle is known for a quote that says, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." In the past, what we have tended to do is to think about IEPs as different segments or different parts. Mm-hmm. As a new piece came into the law, we simply added on another part to the IEP. And so when we came across this idea that standards-based IEPs, we asked the question, well, what does that mean? How do I bring in the standards to the IEP? And I think the best thing that we need to do is think that standard-based IEPs is really about good, effective IEP writing and development. It's really about planning. So we can look at this idea of product versus process. The IEP is ultimately a product. It is intended to be an individualized plan. It is intended to be a plan that is reasonably calculated to result in educational benefit. That individualized and the educational benefit are 2 very critical components of the IEP, because in the special education world, that really is the definition of FAPE, of free, appropriate public education. But how do we get the information that we want to put on the IEP, on that plan? That's really the process. And we need to be thinking about an IEP as not about filling in all of the spaces, but rather about planning to determine what really is needed for the student to benefit from education. And then we put it on the form. Mm-hmm. So we might think about the IEP process as starting out first with thinking about where do we want to be in the long term, the end result. Then we take a lot of time to talk about what we call present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, which is really about looking at the data and looking at and deciding what is it that this student really needs. Ultimately, then we write their goals, we then select instructional programs, we implement and we monitor our progress, and then we start over the next year. Mm-hmm. We might think about IEP development sort of like a GPS. In order to use a GPS, you first have to know where it is you want to go. Mm-hmm. You want to know where you want to end up. Then you have to put in some data about where you currently are. This creates a map for you, but as you go along, new opportunities arise or you come across a barrier that you didn't know was going to be there and you have to adjust. Mm-hmm. So finally, when you arrive at your first goal, you choose a new goal to get to the next place you want to go. So we want to keep that idea of a GPS in mind as we think about IEP development. In essence, when we are planning, there are 2 very critical components. First is knowing where you want to go, And the second is using sound data as the basis for your plan.
Carol, could you talk a little bit about assumptions that might underline the effective IEP process?
Sure. And these assumptions are assumptions about good IEPs, but they're also assumptions that drive the basis of the training that you're going to be receiving in these modules, or the content of these modules. So the first assumption really is that a good IEP is reasonably calculated to result in educational benefit. We need to make sure that the end result is educational benefit for the student. A second assumption that good IEPs are connected to the state standards and that is a fundamental component to educational benefit. The third one is that good IEPs require or are dependent upon knowing about curriculum and effective instructional practice. We're going to be talking about the process of good IEPs, but another really, really important component, and I hope that you might even be getting some additional training on this, is really knowing your curriculum and knowing what research-based or effective instructional practices are. Another assumption that I have is that writing IEPs is not an isolated event. We know that we have the IEP meeting and it takes place at a certain point in time with a team, but actually if you're really doing a good job, the IEP process is about data collection that is ongoing and about a lot of conversations that occur prior to the meeting as well as after the meeting. And finally, I know that we have to be cognizant of the regulations. And we know that IEPs must have all the components of the IDEA regulations. So good IEPs are consistent with regulation, and they're consistent with best practice, but that alone does not guarantee better results for students. It's critical to understanding the regulations because the regulations are intended and have assumptions with them that they will lead to better results for students, but it takes a lot more than that as well. So what is the IEP? The I in the IEP. The I really stands for individualized. You know, when I started this work around standards-based IEPs, and it was really some time ago, I got a lot of questions about, well, standards-based IEPs means then that we're going to lose the individualization. Every student has a standard on the standards on their IEPs. But in fact, this is not about every student having the same standards in the IEP, but rather about maintaining the individualization because each student has individual data and needs that we bring to the process. One size doesn't fit all. There will be different goals for different students based on different needs. And you know, sometimes we think that sometimes the hardest thing to see is the most obvious. We've all gone through training on IEP writing, and somehow we think now that when we talk about standards-based, that it's something new and unique. But actually, it's really about good practice. Here is a good time to possibly pause and take a little time to reflect before we move on. Before I tell you my opinion about why standards are important, I'd like you to take a little time to think for yourself. Why are standards important to the IEP process? Why should you consider standards when developing IEPs for your students? When you've taken a little time to reflect on those, come back and I'll give you some of my answers.